There was a time when a garden could feed a family for years without requiring a new packet of seeds every spring, and some of the plants your grandmother depended on have almost disappeared from modern gardens, not because they were difficult to grow, but because they were almost too easy. Imagine walking into a cold October garden and pulling a root from the ground that tastes surprisingly like an apple dipped in honey. Imagine onions that plant themselves, beans that help feed the soil, asparagus that keeps producing for decades, and fruit vines that can outlive the person who planted them. These were not gardening experiments. They were part of everyday life. One of the best examples is Good King Henry, a perennial vegetable once known as poor man's asparagus. Your great-grandmother could grow it in a shady corner where many other vegetables struggled. In spring, the young shoots could be cooked much like asparagus, while the leaves could be harvested through summer and prepared like spinach. One planting could provide food year after year because the same crown returned each spring. That reliability was its greatest weakness in a commercial system built around repeat purchases. Why keep buying seed when the plant keeps coming back? Another forgotten treasure was old, open-pollinated corn. Varieties such as Reed's Yellow Dent and Bloody Butcher were more than crops. They were part of a self-renewing food system. Farmers grew the corn, used it for meal and livestock feed, selected the best ears, and saved seed for the next season. Then hybrid corn became increasingly important during the 20th century. Hybrid varieties brought major agricultural advantages, but saved seed from a hybrid does not reliably reproduce the same characteristics as the original cross. As farmers moved toward purchased seed, the old habit of saving corn seed declined. Yet many heritage varieties survived because families, seed keepers, and preservation groups refused to let them disappear. Then there were cowpeas, whippoorwill peas, crowder peas, black-eyed peas, and many others. They could produce food through hot southern summers, but their hidden value was underground. As legumes, cowpeas work with soil bacteria to fix nitrogen from the atmosphere, helping return fertility to the soil. Those little nodules along their roots were nature's tiny fertilizer factories. Your great-grandfather did not need a chemistry lesson to understand the principle. He could rotate legumes with other crops and watch the soil respond. Today, gardeners may spend money on bags of nitrogen fertilizer for a job that legumes can partly accomplish through a living relationship beneath the soil. Then came Turkey red wheat, carried to America by Mennonite families in the 19th century. Family stories describe carefully selecting the finest kernels before the journey because the seed represented more than food. It represented a family's future. Turkey red became important across Kansas and helped build the region's wheat-growing tradition. But think beyond the field for a moment. Picture a grandmother on baking day, grinding grain, working dough by hand, and filling the house with the smell of fresh bread. That smell was part of the rhythm of the week. A relatively small wheat planting, combined with careful storage, could provide a family with flour through winter. Then there was the remarkable walking onion. Your grandmother may have called it a winter onion, while others called it the Egyptian walking onion. It earned that strange name honestly. Instead of simply producing seed, it forms small bulbils at the top of the stalk. When the cluster becomes heavy, the stalk bends toward the ground, and those little bulbs can root, creating new plants. Year after year, the patch seems to walk across the garden. Once established, it can provide green onions and small bulbs without demanding that you replant the entire bed every season. Imagine January arriving and still having onions outside for the soup. No grocery trip, no fresh seed packet. The plant had already prepared itself for another season. Another old tradition was sweet sorghum. Before refined sugar dominated American kitchens, families across the South and Appalachians grew tall sorghum cane and crushed it for its sweet juice. That juice was boiled into dark syrup used on biscuits, oatmeal, and other foods. But sorghum was about more than sweetness. The autumn syrup-making season could become a community event, with neighbors gathering around the mill and helping transform a field of cane into food that could last for months. Many local mills eventually disappeared as commercial sugar production changed the economics of sweeteners, but the tradition survived in a few places. Then there was the muscadine vine, a native southern fruit that could become a living inheritance. Families grew muscadines along fences, smokehouses, and simple arbors, harvesting grapes for fresh eating jelly, and preserves. Some historic vines have survived for centuries. Think about that. A plant can remain productive long after the person who planted it is gone. A cutting can become a new vine, and that vine can provide more cuttings for another generation. That is not simply gardening, it is passing food forward. Rhubarb worked the same way on a smaller scale. Your grandmother may have called it the pie plant. Every spring, its red stalks return from the same crown, often becoming one of the first fresh ingredients available after winter. A stalk could be pulled, dipped in sugar, and handed to a child who would make a face at the tartness before reaching for another bite. The crown could live for many years, and when it became large, it could be divided and shared with neighbors. One plant could eventually become an entire neighborhood supply. Just remember the important safety rule. The stalks are the edible part. Rhubarb leaves should not be eaten. And now we reach the strange root promised at the beginning, salsify, sometimes called the oyster plant. It grows as a long, pale root beneath the soil, and when cooked properly, its flavor has traditionally been compared to mild oysters. Older cooks used it in fritters, stews, and other dishes, while roots could be stored through winter. Yet because the root looked ordinary and did not fit neatly into modern supermarket displays, it gradually disappeared from mainstream production. The plant itself never needed to disappear. It simply stopped being profitable enough to remain common. If you grow it yourself, however, you can rediscover what earlier gardeners valued. One of the toughest plants in the old garden was the sunchoke, also known as the Jerusalem artichoke. It produced knobby underground tubers and could return year after year from pieces left in the soil. It tolerated conditions where more demanding vegetables struggled, which made it especially valuable for families who could not afford to waste good ground on a crop that required constant attention. Older gardeners also knew a simple trick: harvest sunchokes after a hard frost. Cold weather can make the tubers sweeter and easier for some people to digest. Then there was horseradish, the root that could turn a quiet kitchen into a room full of tears. Once established, horseradish can be extremely persistent because even small pieces of root can produce new plants. Every year, roots could be dug and grated fresh, then mixed with vinegar to create a powerful condiment. The reason homemade horseradish tasted so intense was simple. Fresh horseradish is at its hottest immediately after grating, and that heat gradually fades during storage. Your grandmother did not need a complicated recipe. She simply knew that fresh was stronger. Then came the asparagus patch, the ultimate lesson in patience. An established asparagus bed can remain productive for 15, 20, or even 30 years under good conditions. But the gardener must first make an investment of time. During establishment, you cannot harvest every spear simply because it appears. The plant needs its foliage to strengthen the roots. Your grandmother understood something modern gardeners often forget. Sometimes you have to leave food alone today so it can feed you for decades tomorrow. And when spring finally arrived, those first thick green spears pushing through cool soil were worth the wait. Now we come to seeds and ownership. The Plant Variety Protection Act of 1970 created a legal system allowing qualifying plant varieties to receive intellectual property protection. That changed the relationship between farmers, breeders, and seed. Traditional seed saving did not disappear overnight, and farmers retained certain rights under the law, but protected varieties could not simply be treated exactly like an old family bean passed between neighbors. Meanwhile, heirloom beans and other open-pollinated crops continued surviving outside corporate ownership because families and seed keepers maintained them. Cherokee Trail of Tears, rattlesnake, turkey craw, and other traditional beans became living examples of what happens when people keep selecting, drying, storing, and replanting their own seed. A garden could produce food today and the means to grow that food again next year. Another overlooked resource came from trees. Most people think of maple when they hear tree syrup, but black walnut, birch, and box elder can also produce sap that can be boiled down. The amount of sap required varies greatly by species, and birch generally requires much more sap than maple. But the principle is fascinating. Sweetness can come from a tree already standing in the landscape. Modern research has renewed interest in walnut and birch syrup, proving that some old ideas were never as outdated as they seemed. Then there is pawpaw, one of North America's most unusual native fruits. It is widely recognized as the continent's largest native fruit and has a flavor often described as somewhere between banana and mango. Pawpaw trees can grow naturally across large areas of the eastern and central United States, yet most supermarket shoppers have never tasted one. Why? Because a ripe pawpaw bruises easily and has a short shelf life. It does not behave like an apple that can travel across the country and sit in a warehouse. The supermarket system largely passed it by, but gardeners and preservation programs kept it alive. A backyard pawpaw tree can provide fruit for years, turning an overlooked native plant into a seasonal treasure. Another tree that once spread through neighborhoods was the fig. Many old southern fig trees began not from expensive nursery stock, but from cuttings shared between families. A small cutting could be rooted, planted, and eventually become a mature tree producing fruit and more cuttings. One grandmother's fig tree could effectively become the ancestor of an entire neighborhood's fig trees. In colder regions, gardeners can sometimes grow figs in containers and protect them during winter, depending on their climate. The old principle was always the same: adapt the plant to the conditions rather than giving up immediately. And when the harvest finally came, the family needed somewhere to store it. That is where the root cellar mattered. Before modern refrigeration became universal, a cool, dark storage room built into the earth could hold potatoes, carrots, cabbage, apples, squash, and other crops for months. The earth itself helped maintain a stable temperature. No compressor. No monthly electricity bill. Darkness was not a problem. It was part of the design. Modern freezers are incredibly useful, but they depend on electricity. The old root cellar depended primarily on temperature, darkness, humidity, and proper storage. Then there was fermentation. A stoneware crock could transform cabbage, cucumbers, and other vegetables into foods that lasted far beyond the harvest. Sauerkraut is a perfect example. Shredded cabbage, salt, pressure, brine, and time allow naturally occurring lactic acid bacteria to carry out fermentation. Your grandmother may never have used scientific words for the process, but she knew exactly what to do, and, perhaps even more importantly, she knew how to recognize when something had gone wrong. Then came the skill that connected almost every crop on this list: saving seed. Open-pollinated varieties can generally be saved and replanted with predictable characteristics when properly selected and isolated, while hybrid seed may not reproduce the same traits in the next generation. That does not make hybrids bad. It simply means they serve a different purpose. For gardeners who want independence from yearly seed purchases, open-pollinated varieties can be especially valuable. Let the healthiest plants mature, save seed from the best examples, dry it properly, store it safely, and plant it again. A single packet can become the beginning of a seed line that continues for generations. Seed Savers Exchange is a powerful modern example of how family seeds can be preserved and shared rather than forgotten. Then there is comfrey, a plant traditionally valued for producing large amounts of leafy growth and accessing nutrients through its deep root system. Gardeners can cut the leaves and use them as mulch or incorporate them into compost and other fertility practices. It was part of an older philosophy. Instead of buying every nutrient from a store, grow some of your own fertility. The same philosophy appeared in the small herb bed beside the kitchen door. Thyme, sage, rosemary, oregano, mint, chamomile, basil, and other herbs could provide flavor all season, then be dried and stored for winter. A handful of homegrown herbs might cost almost nothing once the plants were established, while store-bought herbs could sit on shelves for months losing aroma. Your grandmother simply walked outside, cut what she needed, and brought it into the kitchen. Then there was the potato row, the dependable staple that could fill a cellar. A good planting could produce a substantial winter supply, and varieties such as Kennebec became beloved for their usefulness and storage qualities. Families could select healthy potatoes from one harvest as seed for the next. Grow, harvest, save, replant, repeat. It was a simple cycle, but it turned a garden into a renewable food system. And finally, we return to the root that started everything. Stir it. Pull it from the ground in autumn or winter and taste the root for yourself. Historical descriptions praised its sweetness and pleasant flavor, often comparing it to sugar, honey, or other naturally sweet foods. It was grown in European and American gardens for centuries, but eventually faded from mainstream agriculture. Once again, the pattern is familiar. It was perennial, it could be divided, and it did not fit neatly into a system that depended on gardeners buying new seed every year. Yet skirret survived through preservation and specialty seed growers. It is a reminder that a plant can disappear from supermarkets without disappearing from history. But the greatest treasure on this entire list was not skirret, asparagus, beans, or any other individual crop. It was the backyard itself. Imagine all of these pieces working together in one small garden. Perennial vegetables beside the kitchen, walking onions spreading naturally, beans drying for seed, herbs growing within arm's reach, rhubarb beside the fence, a fig tree near the porch, asparagus protected for future harvests, potatoes stored for winter, fermented vegetables in a crock, seeds saved for spring, and fruit vines climbing along the property. That was not merely a hobby, it was a food system. During World War II, millions of American families participated in victory gardens, producing a significant share of the nation's fresh vegetables while supporting the broader war effort. The important lesson is not that the past was perfect. It was not. Modern agriculture, refrigeration, improved seeds, and supermarkets have brought enormous benefits. But something valuable was also lost as families became less connected to the process of growing and preserving their own food. Your grandmother understood that a garden could do more than produce vegetables. It could produce seed for next year, fertility for the soil, food for winter, cuttings for neighbors, and knowledge for children. So you do not need to recreate an entire old-fashioned farm. Start with one thing. Plant a rhubarb crown. Try walking onions. Grow an open-pollinated bean and save the seed. Establish asparagus if you are willing to wait. Add a few herbs beside the kitchen. Plant a fig or muscadine where your climate allows. Or, if the apple and honey promise brought you here, grow skirret and taste this forgotten root yourself. Because once you plant one of these old crops, learn how it grows, save what you can, and share it responsibly, it is no longer forgotten. It becomes part of your garden. And perhaps one day, someone else will carry a cutting, bulb, crown, or handful of seed from your garden into theirs. That is how old gardening knowledge survives. One garden, one family, and one generation at a time. If you want to rediscover more forgotten crops, old-fashioned gardening skills, and practical ways our grandparents made their gardens work harder, stay with us, subscribe, and keep watching.